Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Perez, and I'm the mental health professional here at GAR High School. I want to welcome you today to our Student Resource Center Wellness Workshop for our parents for this month's theme, which is non-suicidal self-injury. Today, we have the great honor of having Teen Line, which is one of our community partners here. And I'll go ahead and let our facilitator introduce herself. Take it away, Cheryl. It's all you.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thanks for your attention to this really important subject of mental health in general, and then we'll spend some time on non-suicidal self-injury as well. So as Ms. Perez said, I'm Cheryl Eskin. I'm the program director of Teen Line, which I'll explain what that is in just a moment if you don't know what it is. But as program director, well, I guess I'll get into just explaining what it is. So what we are at Teen Line, we're a teen-to-teen hotline where teens can call, text, or email and speak to another teen about anything they're struggling with. So it can range from relationship issue to suicide to self-injury to LGBTQ, gender and sexuality, anything that a teen is struggling with, we're equipped to handle. And you can see on this screen, we're open every night from 6 to 10 Pacific time for phone calls, 6 to 9 for text, and then we have an way to email us as well. We also, it's not on here, but our message board, you can kind of see in the email us, is teenlineonline.org. That's our website. And we have a message board on there as well, where if teens want to interact with other teens who might be struggling, it's a great resource as well. So what's unique about Teen Line is we are staffed entirely by teens. We train about 60 to 80 teens from the greater Los Angeles area every year to be what we call listeners. And we really, were founded in 1980, so over 40 years ago, based on the idea that when teens are struggling, they're much more likely to reach out to the peers in their lives than they are the adults. And obviously a lot has changed in 40 plus years, but that premise I think still is the same. So it's a great opportunity if you have a teen in your life who you're struggling with, or you feel is struggling, or a friend, or a teen who you think would be really good at this type of work. It's definitely a resource, resource to know about. So, and we do, I'm not remembering if we're coming out to GAR specifically, but hopefully we will in the future if we haven't already. But we do right now virtual, because everything is virtual, presentations about our services and general mental health in general. So about me, I'm the program director, which means that I supervise the hotline overall. And I also supervise the adults who supervise the teens. So like I said, we train the teens to do this amazing work, but they also are supervised by adults. They also are supervised by adults as well, who don't get on the calls and text per se, but they're there to debrief with them, guide them, just offer some structure to the evening. Also a licensed marriage and family therapist and a parent of a teen and tween. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, I'm living as well. So what I wanted to also highlight is, let's see, I think I'm going to skip this because I'm going to have some issues with volume, I think, if I'm going to skip this. But
unprecedented times like these can be hard for teens like us.
It is stressful.
Scary.
Sad.
Overwhelming right now, but we
at Teen Line
are here for you.
We at Teen Line are here for you.
Teens like us are answering texts and emails from 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and calls from 6 to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 days a week.
So if there's anything you'd want to talk about, feel free to reach out.
I'm hoping you were able to hear that. If not, that could be edited out, but that's a little clip that was put together by our teens during the pandemic specifically of what we are. I also wanted to make you aware of resources that we do publish for teens and adults, brochures about a variety of topics, including self-injury, drug abuse, bullying, sex and sexuality. These are all, if we were in person, I would give you these pretty brochures to take home with you, but who are not in person, they're downloadable or accessible on our website, which is teenlineonline.org. The Teens Helping Teens one and the Teen Suicide Prevention are also available in Spanish as well. And they're brochures that just give you general information as well as how to help someone in your life. So wanted to let you know about that. Okay, so I'm going to get to the gist of the presentation here, which obviously, like we said, is focusing on non-suicidal self-injury, but also on mental health in general. And I love this quote, so I can read it to you. Unfortunately, we live in a world where when you break your arm, everyone runs over to sign your cast. But if you tell people you're depressed, everyone runs the other way. That's the stigma. We are so accepting of any body part breaking down other than our brains. So hopefully people can take a moment to think about that. And I just realized that, yeah, we still live in a world that physical injury is considered very different from emotional injury or emotional struggle. And so one of Teen Line's goals is to decrease the stigma and get people the help they may need to go through these difficult things in their life. And I think particularly in this pandemic, I think your school might be coming back in the near future. I'm imagining obviously a modified schedule, mask, distance, not like things were over a year ago. But we're living in a time where a lot has changed and people have definitely dealt with economic hardships and loss of, loved ones, as well as just loss of, jobs, loss of our teens, loss of their activities, loss of going to school, loss of prom, so many different things. So I think there's a lot going on with mental health right now, and a lot of people, teens included, who are struggling. So one of the goals of this presentation is to help you if you feel like your teen or yourself is one of the people that's struggling. So this is actually pre-COVID statistic, but I actually would almost venture to say it's gone up, which breaks my heart, that we do say a statistic, 1 out of every 5 adolescents has a diagnosable mental health disorder. And generally anxiety is the top one we see in there. ADHD, things like that can be in there, depression. So our teens before COVID, I think in general, weren't doing so well. Lots of reasons why that might be so that we won't get into. But the heartbreaking part to me is only about half of them ever get the help that they need. And so that's a lot of adolescents or teens or young people who are really struggling, who aren't necessarily getting help, who believe that they're crazy or there's something wrong with them, or they're, not living up to their potential or what they could be doing because they're struggling with their mental health. So again, decreasing the stigma. There's also a statistic that the average age of onset of symptoms and treatment is 10 years. So imagine your 12-year-old who might have, a panic attack for the first time, but doesn't tell anyone because they're ashamed and thinks there's something wrong. And if any of you struggle with panic disorders or anxiety, it often gets worse. So fast forward to this 15-year-old who now, might not be hanging out with friends because they're afraid of having a panic attack. Fast forward to an 18-year-old who might not have, graduated high school because they're too anxious to go to school. Fast forward, you can see the trajectory to the 20-year-old who doesn't want to live anymore for something that at 12, if they had the support, might have been able to be treated, because we do know a lot of mental health is really treatable if the right help is given. So another sobering statistic is that suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 20, it's actually 10 to 24-year-olds, but for this purposes, it's 10 to 19-year-olds. And so we obviously want to bring that down. One of the things we definitely can do is know what to look for, talk about it, and just decrease the stigma. And that's the key too. We're probably not going to prevent every death by suicide, but at least we can prevent a lot. And there's a lot of people who think about suicide who don't go on to attempt, or there's people who attempt who don't go on to die. So if we can, if we can get to them, there's a lot of hope in there. I thought I had a statistic about non-suicidal self-injury, but it doesn't. Maybe that's coming up sooner. What I wanted to talk about a little bit is typical teen behavior, and then what are signs to worry. And this year, like I said, has been very strange in terms of teens have not been able to do what they're developmentally supposed to. So part of being a teen is spending time with their friends, being away from their family, figuring out who they are, becoming more independent. That's a developmental expectation. And this year has really curtailed a lot of it. A lot of our teens have been, trapped at home, not been able to socialize in the way they want to, not been able to, live their lives to become independent the way they want to. All of a sudden, people are just together a lot more. So I think what's typical is kind of different this year, but I will put in the typical in general. One of the things, and if we were together, I'd be asking people what they think, but I will go through it since we're not all together. One of the things we see often in teens is moodiness. See less affection and attention with their parents, as hurtful as that is and as hard as it can be. That's developmentally appropriate for teens. Increased desire for independence. That's something we see as well. And again, this year has been hard because a lot of the ways for them to be independent have been taken away. Self-involved is one as well, that teens are wonderful and amazing and can do really great things, but they're just learning to kind of think about others. And so they can be very self-absorbed. Testing limits is also one that's normal in teens. And this year, it's been an interesting one because testing the limits can be engaging in unsafe COVID behaviors as well, which obviously, developmentally, they're supposed to test limits and see what they can get away with. But it's really scary potentially when it has real health consequences for you or your family. Exploring identity is another issue that we see, or not issue, another thing we see in teens, figuring out who they are. And it could be gender or sexual identity. It can just be what kind of person do they want to be in the world? What do they want to do when they grow up? And these are things that have been a little more challenging this year. Also, experimentation with drugs, alcohol, and sexual behavior is also typical teen behavior. Obviously, a line where it doesn't become typical and it becomes worrisome. And age, like an 11-year-old, is very different. Is experimenting very different and more concerning than a 17-year-old. But that is the age where they're trying different things out. And a lot of that actually has been, drugs and alcohol, a lot of it, I think, has been changed this year. I will tell you, at least from calls to our contacts to our hotline, family issues have gone up with people, having issues with the people they live with. But what's gone down is friend issues and romantic issues, which in some ways you can think of as nice, as there's less drama, for lack of a better word. But it's also kind of sad because this is the time when they're supposed to be figuring out what it means to be a good friend or what it means to be involved with someone romantically or even to have a crush. So that's something that's been different. Peer conflicts also usually pretty typical among teens, gone down this year for better or for worse. What I want to talk about, what we call red flags or cries for help. And in general, I always tell parents to trust your own instincts, or trust your gut, your child best. If you're really concerned about something that's going on with your child, get outside help. At your school, you have resources, you have counselors who can help. Maybe you have a family doctor, a family friend, clergy, a teacher, just someone that you can talk to about what might be going on with your teen. Having them call a hotline, having you call as well, really important to do, to reach out if you think they're struggling. And generally, academic records are kept separate from mental health records, so you don't have to worry about it affecting your teen's academic performance if they talk to a school counselor. So one of the things we really worry about is a teen who's talking about suicide or homicide, making comments, doesn't matter. No one would miss me if I was gone. It doesn't, no one would miss me if I was gone. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I just want to be done. I want to go to sleep and never wake up. A lot of these things, and I will say this year has been such a tough year that a lot of us are struggling. And so there's comments that in a normal year, we would have worried more than we worried this year, if that made any sense. But I think any teen making any comment like that, we do have to take seriously, and we have to follow up. What do they mean by that? Are they having a bad day, or are they thinking of taking their life? And in general, I think suicide and homicide we need to take seriously immediately. But a lot of these other things, we're looking at patterns over time. So if we've seen this behavior more days than not for the last couple of weeks, or again, going back to trusting your gut. This isn't necessarily one day where your kid stays in their room and doesn't come out, but a pattern over time when they're, in their room constantly and not doing anything. Self-injury is obviously, which we're going to talk a little bit more later, definitely what we call a cry for help or a time to get your teen some support. Frequent angry outbursts, excessive aggression, more so that, I hate to stereotype males and females, but males tend to be more angry and aggressive. Females tend to cry more. Obviously, not everyone fits that stereotype, but talking about anger, anger, this has been a hard year. Anger is understandable, but this is like breaking things, breaking walls, being afraid for your safety or their safety is definitely a time to get some support. Big thing we look for in general is change in behavior, attitude, appearance, school performance. And we look at the baseline. If you had a teen who used to care a lot about school and now doesn't anymore, that worries me a lot more than a teen who never really cared about school and now still isn't really caring about school. Same with things like how they used to act or how they used to care about their appearance, things like that. We're looking at baseline. And again, it isn't necessarily that one day they didn't care about school. It's a pattern over time. Another thing we look at is lots of somatic complaints that we know a lot of what we can struggle with is in our bodies. So a teen, and sometimes we see this with teens or children not wanting to go to school. That's obviously a bit different now in the Zoom world, but maybe headaches, stomach aches, heart racing, things like that we might want to be concerned what's really going on. And kind of going back to the suicidal, homicidal ideation, teens who are making a lot of hopeless and worthless comments, just not feeling good about themselves, is something that we might want to be concerned about. Again, this list is by no means comprehensive, but some of the main things we want to look for. And some of the things in general, we talk about risk factors, obviously not 100% predictive, but things that we know if these things are going on with teens, they might put them at more risk for other mental health concerns. And one of them we look for in pre-COVID life is a recent loss or other life stressors. So we've all this year been impacted by loss or life stressors. So we want to look at that. And when I say loss, it doesn't even have to be a death or, losing someone physically. It could be, just the loss of not going to school, the loss of not playing on their sports teams, the loss of prom or whatever else. So I think in some ways, if you look at that, we're all in that general risk factor category. Another thing we look for, abusing drugs or alcohol. It's hard to know what's the chicken or the egg. Are they abusing because they're struggling, or are they struggling because they're abusing? Because I think those two can go together, but that's something we are concerned about. Potentially, as drugs and alcohol make one much more abusive. Using drugs and alcohol make one much more impulsive. So they may end up doing things they wouldn't have done if they weren't using. Suicide, mental illness in the family. We do know that a lot of times mental illness is genetic. Having a parent with anxiety or depression may put a teen at more risk to have these behaviors. So that, to be aware of that. Suicide, we don't know about a genetic component, but it could also be a learned coping skill. My dad killed himself when things were too hard. I think I'm going to do that too. So that's something to know about. And if you're a parent struggling, to get some help for yourself, because how you're doing impacts your child. No, that's in their choice. That's funny. Abuse and bullying. I'm never going to say that bullying causes suicide, because I don't think it's all that simple or causes mental health. But a teen who's being abused or being bullied is not feeling good about themselves, is not, struggling with confidence and a lot of other things that might put them more at risk in general. We also say just questioning your identity and sexuality. teens want to fit in. They want to be like everyone else. So if they're questioning, are they, attracted to the same sex? Are they attracted to different sex? Who are they? That can put them at more risk. And one of the things we talked about is just stigma of teens struggling and not wanting to admit it, either because they think people wouldn't get it, or they think less of them, or they may not even realize they have a problem as well. So I think stigma is definitely a risk factor. So some of the protective factors, so we could be hopeful as well. Having permission to talk. If you're listening to this presentation, that says to me that you want to, know more about how to help your teen and how more to interact. And so teens having permission to talk about their feelings from their parents or other people in their lives can really help. And someone to talk to who will validate their feelings, which means sometimes as a parent, you may think what your teen is struggling with is the most ridiculous thing and not understand it at all. That doesn't mean we can't be supportive and imagine what it might be like for them, or thinking back to what you were like as a teen and how you might have felt. Another thing is we talked about someone to talk to who really listen. There's a saying that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because we should listen more than we talk. But most of us, and I'm putting myself in this category as a parent, is we talk a lot more than we really listen. And sometimes that's even helpful to ask to our kids, do you want me to listen to you? Do you want me to tell you what I think you should do? Do you want my advice? And a lot of times they'll just want you to listen. Sometimes that act of listening can get out what they're feeling and you don't have to do much else. Responsibility of the community is another one. If they're involved in community activities or involved in the sport or involved in, even a job or an after school thing, even involved in a religious community, that can be a thing that can keep the kids going as well. Strong family system, and I'm defining that doesn't have to be like a 2-parent mom and dad family by any means. It's having one, it could be grandparents, it could be single parents, it could be any of that, but having a base where they live, or someone that they can come to, or just even strong adult role model in their life that they feel like they can look up to and can come to and will be there for them unconditionally. Sense of self-worth and purpose. I mean, all of us want to have a sense of self-worth and purpose in our lives. So I think teens who have that more struggle less. And so that's something which, again, really hard during this pandemic, but something to help your teen cultivate. If you have a teen who feels like struggles with feeling good about themselves or what the point of everything is, figuring out what they are good at, what they can excel. Some teens are just not natural students, and yet they spend so much time in school. So if you have a teen who isn't a natural student, what are their other talents? Where are there other areas that they can shine? And believing that there are other areas that they can shine. Religion, we talked about briefly, can definitely be a protective factor, either being involved in the community or beliefs about, taking care of others or listening, or just even having a clergy member support. So we're going to talk about briefly, like I said, we're going to go through some mental health symptoms in general, so you know what to look for. And if you look at this one, I think the interesting thing of this year is, besides alcohol and drug abuse and thoughts of death, probably everyone has grappled with these things this year, or maybe currently. The isolation one is kind of funny because that's usually a sign of depression, but we've been in a year where we've been told to isolate from people. So it's interesting. Where we worry about depression is, again, if these things have manifested for a period of time, usually more than 2 weeks, or if it's impacting daily life. Maybe they have no energy, so they aren't getting out of bed, they aren't doing their schoolwork, they aren't going to Zoom school, things like that. There's a lot of us who function even though we're struggling. What we're looking at is, we could all function better, so we should all take care of it. But we're looking at, are they functioning or are they not? Some of the things you can see: isolation, no energy, hard to concentrate, anger, sadness. Appetite can go up or go down. Sleep problems, sleeping too much, not at all. Guilt, particularly if a family member's struggled with COVID, or they haven't been taking rules appropriately, things like that. Thoughts of death, alcohol, and drug abuse we've talked about before too. And anytime, again, that a teen or person in your life is having thoughts of death, that's time to get them some support, or at the very least ask, what's going on? What can I do for you? Some of the symptoms we see of anxiety, which are interesting. Some of them manifest in our body, like with stomach issues, headaches, rapid heartbeat, trouble breathing. And oftentimes, particularly in this pandemic, there's a number of people who've gone to the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack, and it turns out really to be anxiety or a panic attack. And in general, I mean, teens are not having heart attacks in general. So a lot of times teens are thinking they are, and it's turning out to be anxiety, which doesn't mean you don't take it seriously if your teen can't breathe, there's a rapid heartbeat, but I'm just saying that's something that we are seeing. We're also seeing things like trouble concentrating, overthinking, constant worrying, and it's hard to do school or hard to do anything when you're constantly worrying. We also see avoiding things. It may be too much to, go out in the world, so they're staying home or things, things like that. And so some of these, some of us struggle with this pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, I think it's even, it can be even worse. So I think being aware of, that sometimes, what we can do to help ourselves when we're feeling overwhelmed anxiety. And I think if you're going back to school in the next couple of weeks, that's going to be an interesting time for your teens too. I've heard definitely some teens who don't want to go back. They've gotten really comfortable at home, and they're also nervous. I mean, we've had a year of saying stay away from people, don't congregate in groups, and all of a sudden they are. So that's interesting as well. And teens who might have already struggled with anxiety, I think this is going to be a harder transition. It's also hard to, interact in the same way. If you're masked and distanced, even if you're with your friends, it's different. So it's just different issues to think about. What I wanted to talk about, because I know that's one of our focus, is something, and I don't know where my statistic is on the rates of self-injury, but what I will tell you without giving you exact rates is self-injury is way too common a problem among our adolescents. It tends to be more common in girls, but that doesn't mean that males can't struggle with self-injury as well. And so just, I will say all cultural groups struggle as well, all religious groups and backgrounds. This isn't something like all mental illness doesn't discriminate. And so some of the things we might see, the most common thing we hear about is cutting. But there also may be teens who scratch until they bleed, who are burning, who are hair pulling, who are hitting themselves, or who even, kind of pick at the scabs or scars and don't let things injure. And it all seems, I'm going to explain this in a minute, it all seems like, why would somebody do this to themselves? Why would you intentionally hurt yourself? And I'll explain that in a minute. But that is something, these are kind of the common reasons of, common types of what we see in self-injury. Some of the signs of self-injury, some of the warning signs that we might see is, having unexplained wounds or scars, that you're seeing, something, a cut or a bruise or something, like a lot on your child that don't really, make sense. They don't really have a good story. What we also may see is covering up. So a person who self-injures, it's an 80-degree day and they're wearing a sweatshirt, or you're going somewhere swimming and they won't put on a bathing suit because they don't want their body to be exposed. So worth looking into if you have a teen who's covering up their body all the time or has Band-Aids or has, things like that, what's really going on. And a lot of teens self-injure on their arms or their wrist, which explains the sweatshirt. But sometimes, inner thighs is all their stomach is also a way when they don't want to get as detected. So that may be, not wanting to change around you, again, not wanting to go in a bathing suit or not wanting to, change, like I said, already change in front of people. Other things we may see, blood stains, like weird blood stains. If you, are in your children's room, you see things on clothes or towels or their bedding. You might find just sharp objects in their room or shards of glass or, things like that. Unfortunately, teens who self-injure can get pretty creative as well, where they might use things that you never would have thought of. Because a lot of us, if we have a teen who we know is self-injuring, we'll take steps to, make sure knives are put away, make sure, sharp things like razors are put away or locked up. But we don't always think of things like picture frames that they can break the glass or other implements or even, paper clips and things like that. What we also see, needing to be alone for long periods of time or hiding in the bathroom a lot. And a lot of these things can be emblematic of other disorders as well. So I don't want to say it's always self-injury, but I think if you're seeing any of these things, it's definitely a time to check in and get yourself and your team some support. What we know about self-injury, and it doesn't really make sense to those of us who think like, how would you ever hurt yourself? How does that make you feel better? How doesn't that hurt? Doesn't it, why? What we do know for a lot of teens who self-injure is they're dealing, or even adults, because it can common in adults as well, it becomes a coping skill. It becomes a way they feel such intense overwhelm, anger, frustration, emotional pain that they don't know how to cope with it. And so what they do is they take it out on their body, because sometimes that physical relief is better than feeling the emotional pain. There's also teens or adults I've heard describe kind of a dissociation where they don't really feel real, or they feel like they're just not really living in their body. And sometimes they will cut themselves or injure themselves to know that they're alive. To see the blood lets them know that they're alive, and it kind of grounds them back in reality. So one of the things we do know is self-injury, as counterintuitive as it sounds, is a coping skill. It's something that, gets them through. If they're frustrated or anger, it's something they've developed. It can become addictive. So it's something we want to catch early before it becomes addictive. We also, kind of on the lines of a coping skill, most teens who self-injure are not suicidal. Self-injury is the thing, and again, this is the counterintuitive part. Self-injury is the thing that's keeping them from taking their lives. It's their way of coping, and a lot of making them feel better. A lot of times when self-injury stops working is when they do become suicidal, because they don't have their coping skill anymore. So if you have a teen who's self-injuring, we do need to definitely take it seriously, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to kill themselves right that very moment. But like I said, we do need to take it seriously so we can get them the help they need. We can get them the tools they need, get them healthier coping behaviors. And if you look at this slide here, usually before, most people who self-injure are really ashamed of it. They know it's not the right thing to do. They don't want people to know about it. They're frustrated and angry at themselves that they did this as well, but they're also calm. It can often just relieve them. So beforehand, they're feeling overwhelmed or sad or just hurt. During it, it's usually something that's done in private. So they're isolating by themselves and they're angry at themselves. And after they continue to be angry at themselves, it's kind of like an alcoholic who says, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore, and then takes the drink. There's a sense of shame and anger of, I don't have the willpower. Why am I doing this again? But there's also a sense of relief and a sense of calm as well that sadly doesn't last as long. It's kind of like other drugs and other addictions. It doesn't last as long after you keep doing it. Like that period of calm or period of relief gets smaller and smaller, and you often need to, do it more. So I want to talk briefly. I don't think this slide is very legible, unfortunately, but I will also say that I'm talking very casually about very big things and wanting to acknowledge that this is a lot of information. This is a lot of content that may be new to some people as well. I unfortunately or fortunately talk about this stuff a lot, so I can talk about it in a conversational way, but that doesn't mean that this isn't heavy. And so I want to say that to you, that if you're listening and you're struggling or you're feeling triggered, that you talk to someone, you take steps to, be there for yourself. Because this is hard, and to think about our teens feeling this way and struggling is really hard as well. And to even think about, our child who we gave birth to, have been with since birth or however long, thinking of wanting to hurt themselves is unimaginable. But these are some of the things that we do want to look for, and these are relevant to teens and adults. Most people who are suicidal give warning signs. We need to know what to look for. And we talked already about some of the things they might say. They may even come out and say, I don't want to be here anymore. I think I'm going to kill myself. And sometimes we joke, laugh them off, and, you know, no, you don't really mean that. And, you know, oh, you wouldn't really do that. But I think we do need to take it seriously. What do you mean by that? It worries me when you say those kinds of things. Are you joking? Or are you know, because I take this seriously. We also might see a change in mood where we see depression, rage, anger, anxiety. Behaviors we see are kind of, again, change in, change in the baseline, what they wanted, what they were like before. We also might see risky behaviors because they don't really care anymore. So driving recklessly, or in this case, being without a mask, or, you know, drugs, sexual promiscuity, because they're acting recklessly. They don't really care, and doing things that necessarily aren't typical. Teens don't necessarily make wills, but they might give away things too. So if you have a teen, you know, your teen comes home and says, their friend gave them their iPhone because they didn't need it anymore, that's a little worrisome to me, is why is this teen giving away their iPhone? Adults do those kinds of things too. So if you have someone in your life who's giving away things, you don't really understand it, that might be a time to figure out what is going on with them. Sometimes we'll also see someone who's been depressed for a really, really long time or been struggling, who all of a sudden seems better. And we're all so happy, because it's hard to be around someone who's depressed. And maybe they are better. Maybe they've been going to therapy. Maybe they're taking meds. Maybe they're taking, steps that have made them better. But it also could be that they've made a plan to end their life. And that's why they're feeling okay, because they know in a matter of days, they're not going to be here anymore. So that's also a warning sign we have to look for. An improved mood in someone who's been down for a long period of time is, worth investigating of why this sudden change in mood. So you take one thing away from here today, it's if this is a myth or a truth, and it's asking someone if they're thinking about suicide will put the idea in their head. And I'm going to say that's a huge myth, that people just aren't that susceptible. If you're asking someone about suicide, it's because you've noticed things. It's because you're worried about things. It's not something you just ask out of the blue. And us saying, I'm worried about you. You've said a lot of things that alarm me. Do you ever think about killing yourself? Usually is a real sign. I've done this in my own life. It's a huge relief to people, because it means, oh my gosh, someone gets me, someone understands. And something ask in a calm, non-judgmental, much easier said than done way, they will answer you honestly. So we're just not, even as young as 8, we're saying that kids understand what suicide is. So this is a conversation you can have with young kids as well. And if you're worried about it, ask. You don't want to wonder what would have happened if I had asked, what if they had told me? And again, we're just not that susceptible, that asking about suicide is not encouraging it. It's not saying it's a good idea. It's saying, hey, I'm concerned about you and I want to know. Also practice. Good advice is to practice asking that question, because that's a really hard question to ask. And I think with teens in general, the best time to talk about this stuff is when you're not concerned about them. So one takeaway from this presentation is to talk with your kids about these things, see what they're seeing among their friends, amongst themselves, let them know that you're a resource to them. So you have this conversation before you need to, and hopefully none of you will need to, but the way that we do know suicide doesn't discriminate. And it could be, your family member or your best friend's family member or someone. So having these tools is really important. So I want to get into how you can best support your teens, and you can see this as well. One of the things to do is to know the signs, like know what to look for. A lot of the stuff we went over today. And we talked briefly, don't be afraid to use words like depression or suicide or discuss recent events. Again, it's better to have these conversations when you're not concerned, and to open that dialogue with your teens. Be physically and emotionally present, where a lot of us are really physically present these days, that maybe we're not working or we're working from home or we're with our kids a lot more than we ever used to be, but we're not always emotionally present, which means we're busy on our phones, we're busy in our own lives, and so making sure we take time where we do put our phones away, and our teens too, and have a time to check in with them. Talked already about listening more than we talk. That's an important thing to do. Empathizing, which we talked about briefly as well. Again, some of the things our teens are upset about, we don't understand, we don't get. And I'm never going to say adult lives aren't hard and we're worried about paying rent or paying mortgage or feeding our kids and so many important things. But teens' lives, particularly right now, are not easy either. I mean, being cut off from their friends, worrying about family, not being in school, not getting to do their activities, that's hard as well. So I don't think, I mean, I think it's good probably in a moment when they're calm to give the perspective of how it could be worse, or how other families or teens have it worse. But in a moment when they're upset, telling them it's not okay to be upset because people have it worse is not necessarily the most helpful. It makes it seem like you don't understand what's going on. So being able to imagine what it would be like to be them is important. I also think teens look to us to how we cope with things. So showing them how we take care of ourselves, how we cope, if you're having a bad day, showing them, okay, I'm going to go take 5 minutes, 5 minutes away from all of you to, be by myself or to call a friend or to exercise or show them the ways that we cope when things are hard. I also think knowing when professional help is needed. So if their daily life is impacted, like I talked earlier, it's important to talk to someone. So we got into, but how to check in with a teen you're concerned about, to ask directly without judgment, picking a time that isn't when you have to go run off to make food or to go to work or to deal with another child, a time when you have time to have this conversation. And, asking directly, calmly, without judgment, hard sometimes as parents, including myself in this, I've noticed this, I've noticed that, you don't want to come out of your room, or I've noticed you seem to be crying a lot lately, and I'm concerned about you. This isn't necessarily the time to be mad or to get in trouble. It's just objectively, this is what I've noticed. And if they're at a point where they'll tell you, what's going on, stay and listen. And then I advise, if you're in over your head, and it seems like too much, or if they tell you they're thinking about suicide, or you're scared, get help. Teen Line is here for your teen. That's our number, our text info. There's a 24/7 suicide prevention hotline where there's English, Spanish, and I believe Korean, Mandarin, some other languages as well. So there are resources out there. And suicide prevention hotline, you could also call as someone who's concerned about someone who's suicidal, concerned that they may be suicidal as well. So it doesn't have to be that you're the one who's struggling. It can be you love someone who's struggling. I also wanted to put some good resources in here. Ooh, that went funny. Virtual Hope Box is a really good resource for parents and teens. It's free on, I believe, iPhone and Android, but it's kind of a cool little app. I need to update my picture, but where that says Virtual Hope Box, you put a picture of something that gives you hope. So maybe it's your pet, or maybe it's your sibling, or maybe it's your best friend or boyfriend or whatever, if you're a teen or girlfriend. And that's the picture that gives you hope when you're struggling. And then there's also different things on there, like ways to be distracted, ways to relax, different coping tools. So that's kind of a neat thing when you need some support in the moment. Good app that's also for self-injury for teens who are struggling is Calm Harm. And that gives you other things that you can do instead of self-injury, because it's just not as simple. Kind of if you're thinking about alcoholism, it's not as simple as just saying, don't drink or just stop. You need to come up with other ways to deal with the feelings that lead to that behavior in the first place. Otherwise, you're just, left with a lot of feeling and nowhere to put it. So these are some of the, other ways that you can handle those strong emotions. And then I wanted to end, so those are by no means comprehensive. There's a lot of other apps out there, things like Headspace, Calm, Stop, Breathe, Things. All have free options for iPhone and Android, and they're different relaxation exercises, different breathing exercises, just different things you can do to help you sleep or calm down during this time period. A lot of times if you suggest them to your teens, it's not as well received, but you never know. You can let them know you're trying it, and maybe they'll be willing to try it as well. Other resources, I talked already about Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They're 24/7, 365, so always there for you. I don't have the chat on there, but there's a chat option as well. Know the Signs is a great suicide campaign. Trevor Project is an amazing resource for teens or who are LGBTQ or struggling with gender or sexual identity. They're not gonna, it doesn't mean, if you call it teens calling because they're struggling with sexuality, it's not that they're gonna turn them gay or make them gay. It's just a place to sort out some of those feelings as well, and a supportive environment if they have determined that they are gay. Teen Line is obviously us. That's how you can, that's how you can reach us. Great resource for your teens to know about. And then the last slide is just my information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything comes up. I also want to highlight, I don't know if Ms. Perez is going to come back on, but just highlight the resources at your school and to who you can reach out to if you need some help. So thank you so much for listening, and best of luck in this pandemic. Stay healthy and safe.
Yes, thank you so much, Cheryl, for all of the information that you provided for our parents and hopefully students too, if they want to linger over and watch this video. I do, yes, want to remind all of you as parents that there is that social, emotional, and mental health support here on campus. And so if you are a parent and you're interested in learning about school-based counseling or just check-in systems that we have here, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is carol.perez@abcusd.us. If you can't find me there, feel free to just call the office, call the school, and just ask for Miss Perez or Carol, and they will find me for you. If you are interested in just other resources or crisis support hotlines or other information regarding different social emotional topics, feel free to email me, or we also have a website that is linked under the resources tab on our GAR High School. If you click on the resource tab and you go down to Student Resource Center, we have a whole website full of different crisis support lines, social emotional topics, and also any virtual brain breaks or like a Zen den for students to kind of explore and just look at different coping skills and things that they can do. So thank you so much, Cheryl, for being here today and for giving us this information. It is so, so valuable to us and to our parents and our school community. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the presentation. And yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay.